Okay, I think we'll get going. So welcome everyone to the second event in our Urban ReLeaf Scenario Spotlight series. My name is Dr. Matt Kirby. I'm a researcher at the University of Dundee working on the Urban ReLeaf project. On behalf of Urban ReLeaf, we're pleased to be able to join us today to hear from two fantastic speakers on scenario planning for more sustainable and resilient built environments. In our first event, held last Wednesday, we heard from two experts from practice, Kevin Murray and Graham Ross, a link to which should be in the chat now if you're interested in viewing it. I also just want to take this moment to let you know we're going to be recording this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it back at a later date if interested and share with like-minded colleagues who might also find it interesting. So to start the session today, I'll give a very brief introduction and overview to the Urban ReLeaf project and the community practice working group our Scenario Spotlight series is part of. Then I'll hand over to our speakers, Dr. Sara Barron and Dr. Ítalo Sousa de Sena for their respective talks. Following both talks, we'll have a combined Q&A session from both speakers. So make sure to post your questions throughout the talk using the Q&A function in Zoom, where you should be able to post questions and also upload them. My colleagues Mel, Hassam, and Kevin, who are also here, will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for those questions. We'll then end the session by introducing an optional activity which you can contribute to after the session, where we hope to collect your reflections on what you've heard today and also foster a collective learning around scenario planning and how we can think about it and improve it. So, as mentioned, our event today is part of the Horizon UKRI-funded Urban ReLeaf project. This 4-year project promotes collaboration between local communities and public authorities to address urgent climate challenges and support innovations that enable more just urban greening and resilience. Urban ReLeaf addresses the challenges of increasing environmental stresses in our urban areas, which are accentuated inequalities in access to high-quality green space, lack of suitable data for planning and decision-making, as well as the inclusion of the public in that decision-making and wider science and research. Urban ReLeaf consists of 15 partners working across 6 Urban ReLeaf pilot cities to co-create participatory and data-driven innovations to democratize urban green space monitoring and the wider policymaking process around 4 themes: green space perceptions, urban trees, air quality, and heat stress. As part of the Urban ReLeaf project, we have a dedicated community of practice, working across 3 different themes to promote knowledge exchange, partnership building, and mutual learning. Our Scenario Spotlight series is part of Working Group 3, Urban Design Foresight and Green-Blue Infrastructure Scenario Planning. Our community of practice working group responds to the challenge that urban planning often overlooks diverse citizens' needs, which can slow progress towards greener and more just cities. Our community of practice bridges theory and practice in nature-based solutions, green-blue infrastructure through foresight and scenario planning. And we do this by sharing tools, case studies, and approaches to co-creating more inclusive planning and governance. Very much what this series aims to promote in terms of knowledge exchange and collective learning. Alongside myself, our working group is led by my colleagues at the University of Dundee, Mel, Hassam, and Kevin, who are all on the call today, and we're taking care of your questions. The series explores the breadth and depth of scenario planning, visioning, and how we work with futures within the context of cities, climate resilience, and urban greening. Scenario planning offers a structured, holistic, and coherent way to explore diverse futures, ranging from the probable to the visionary, and in some cases, improbable. Yet there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to working with scenarios in the future, prompting this series to showcase the different tools, techniques, and methods presented by experts across a range of sectors. Today, in the second event in our series, we hear from experts from research who will present novel, interesting examples from their own research on climate resilience and urban forestry. Our first speaker is Dr. Sara Barron, who we're very grateful for joining today, especially given the early start for you over in British Columbia. Sara is Program Director of University of British Columbia's Master of Urban Forest Leadership, whose expertise lies at the intersection between landscape architecture and urban forestry, where she focuses on urban forest strategies for compact communities. At the Design Centre for Sustainability, she has worked with communities in sharing sustainable futures across Western Canada, sustainable futures across Western Canada through policy and planning. Currently, she works with an interdisciplinary team, explores how green spaces support climate adaptation and human well-being, and she's passionate about equipping future leaders to build greener, more resilient cities. So I'm going to let Sarah share her screen and listen to her, yeah, very interesting talk.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be here today to share my research. I hope it will be of some use. I'm just making sure you can see the full screen here. Sounds like that's all right. So, um, I live in British Columbia in Western Canada. And like many places across the world, we're building a lot of housing. And I was on a trip out to this community that you're looking at here in Surrey, British Columbia, and noticed that all of these new communities are going up with increasing density, with sustainability motives, but very few trees. And so I decided to focus my research on understanding how we can explore more green potential futures for places like this. Now, I've chosen relatively provocative winter leaf off images to share what these landscapes look like. But it is true that a lot of the new suburban communities that go up around cities aim for more density because building more compact communities can preserve wildlands and can preserve um, green space elsewhere, and they support better transit and all of these things, but they can come at the expense of green communities for decades while we wait for the trees to grow. And so the next series of slides I'll share with you are about this research exploration. This is the urban forest. This is a photo of the urban forest that I'm sitting in right now, although my background is Bosco Vertical in Milan. But I live in Mount Pleasant, which is a neighborhood in Vancouver, BC, with a fairly eclectic mixture of trees and a lot of community gardening on the verge or median, which is quite beautiful. I work at the University of British Columbia. I focus a lot on education, urban forestry education. So my position is an assistant professor of teaching, and I direct the Master of Urban Forestry Leadership Program, which aims to train leaders in urban forestry. And as I stated at the beginning, something that I'm quite interested in exploring is how we can create more green, livable, climate resilient, dense environments in our peri-urban, suburban landscapes. So the case study is in East Clayton in Surrey, BC, and you can see a bit of a before and after photograph. So you can see the high school. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse here, and you can see the community as it's spread as it's developed around that high school, going from, about 45% canopy cover, 10% impervious surface to 16% canopy, 65% impervious surface. And that has a lot of implications for climate resilience. It's a North American suburban landscape, although it's more dense than many suburban landscapes. And this is an example of one of the design drawings on the left, which was an idea of sort of a laneway behind houses that might have some laneway cottages and some trees. That's the design inspiration, which wasn't exactly what was built out. The two pictures that you see, the one in the middle is a view of the schoolyard. You notice the absence of trees in that schoolyard, and then a very typical suburban park, a tree-ringed grass green lawn. One important step in scenario development is understanding what you have. And so this is just a quick calculation of the green space types within the community. You'll note here that it's quite typical in terms of percentages for how much green is in different typologies, except for in riparian protection. So this was developed as a sustainable community. And as you can see in this photograph, there was quite a bit of work done to protect the riparian areas. These are salmon, these feed into salmon-bearing streams. And so there's a lot of work done for stormwater management in this community. And so that leads to a higher percentage of green space in riparian protection that is normal in a lot of suburban landscapes. But what is typical in a lot of suburban landscapes is a fairly large portion of the potential green space being in private yards. And that's, again, a fairly typical number for North America. Um, I did a lot of scenario work for climate change planning. And I think one of the first steps I wanted to take as I stepped into the world of urban forestry was understanding what indicators might be important to measure and design for. And so I did a Delphi study where I asked both academics and local practitioners what we should be measuring, what we should be aiming for in the scenarios. And so over a few rounds, we asked for a select list of sort of priorities in urban forestry. And you can see the list here, relatively boring slide, but actually a very powerful list to help us understand what priorities in urban forestry were. This is in about 2015, 2016. They've changed a lot as I've watched urban forestry grow and develop. But these are the indicators: diversity, access to nature for residents, canopy cover, stormwater, habitat. You can see um, visual access to nature and greenhouse gas sequestration were two indicators that weren't in alignment between the academics and the practitioners. The academics prioritized visual access to nature as something we should aim for in our urban forest development, but the local practitioners didn't prioritize that indicator. The greenhouse gas sequestration was prioritized by the practitioners and not by the academics. So some interesting contrast there. But what came out on top was diversity and access to nature for residents, the top two that both groups agreed to. I asked local residents in a different way, sending out a survey with kind of dry lists of indicators didn't seem like the right approach for this community. So I did a lot of sidewalk samples and focus groups to understand local priorities and preferences for urban forests to feed into the scenario development. The priorities were accessing natural spaces, and I don't have time within this talk to discuss what that means, but really it was not lollipop street trees and grass. More natural, rich, layered green spaces is what residents spoke about, and also what I observed them spending more time walking towards. So they might not go to that first park I showed you. They might take an extra 10 minutes to walk to a more natural park. So both their words and their actions sort of led to this understanding that natural was important in this community. Having green space near home was really important, particularly in a more dense environment. I know this might be not be dense by European standards, but it's dense for North America. Um, Residents talked about social aspects of green space being important. Different aesthetics were mentioned a lot. What I found interesting was conversations about mature and iconic trees. A number of residents told me about the same tree that was in that schoolyard that I showed you the photo of, and how it had to be cut down because it became unsafe with the development around it. But it had an eagle's nest or eagle's roost or eagle's sort of perch, I should say, not nest. And they spoke with a lot of sadness about that particular tree, which led to this understanding that these iconic trees in neighborhoods can be very important for neighborhood identity. And then I talked a lot about other neighborhood characteristics that may impact the urban forest. So that those two explorations led to the development of the scenarios. One thing that stuck with me during one of the focus group conversations was this sense from residents of the community that other places that had these big green leafy trees. In fact, two residents separately talked about this particular street in Vancouver, which is 30 kilometers away, as being sort of the epitome of success. If you lived in a place like this, you've made it, you have arrived, is the quote from the participant. So these residents living in a new suburb with fewer trees didn't feel as successful as those who lived in a suburb with mature trees, or in this case, a Vancouver neighborhood. So I thought that was an interesting insight that has stuck with me from those explorations with residents. all of that led to some preliminary scenario visualization. So taking that park and sort of thinking through all of the things that we heard from the academics, the practitioners, and the residents to understand what future scenarios of that neighborhood might look like. In the scenario work that I've traditionally done, we always have like a no policy change, just let it go as planned. And then in this case, we had a climate retrofit scenario, sort of imagining if we could turn this neighborhood into a carbon sink, how could that work? How would that look? The next one, feeding on that sort of natural access, an ecological scenario, and then a scenario based on human health, having a lot of access to different types of green space nearby. And so the way I think and the way I process and work with teams is often like Photoshop. And again, this is 10, 15 years ago when Photoshop, this is how I, sorry, learned to do research and learned to do these. I know that AI and different tools can generate these very quickly, but Photoshop visualizations really work to help communicate the essence of a scenario. And so we did these visualizations and then started to look at the community scale. So this is the neighborhood, to look at how each of those different scenarios would play out across the entire neighborhood. So in the climate retrofit, it was really focusing a lot of planting on the south and west sides of buildings. You can see darker stripes on those streets to help potentially with building shading. And then some climate sink areas that hadn't been developed where we could really put in sort of a plantation style carbon sink. The ecological scenario played out across the neighborhood in more connected, larger patches of habitat. And you can see a few streets closed off to allow movement between the corridors. And then the human health really spread the green space opportunities across the neighborhood. So everyone was very, very close to an occupiable, rich green space. We took those broader ideas and moved them down to what we call a sandbox, which is a piece of the neighborhood that's quite representative in terms of the housing typologies. There was one park, and looked at creating design rules for each scenario. So in the larger box on the left of the screen, you can see the climate retrofit scenario, which is a bit crazy. It's putting trees wherever you can. They do fit, they do grow in those places, but it would be a pretty intense neighborhood. It's just playing with that potential future of putting trees wherever they can grow. The ecological scenario backs off a little bit from that and creates a little bit more balance, sort of open space, open green space, as well as closed canopy green space. And the human health has a different palette of trees and different locations of trees to make sure that there's sort of visible green space for all of the homes. Um, but the scenarios needed to be assessed and measured in some way. And urban forestry has a tool called iTreeEco, developed by the United States Forest Service, that allows you to input your urban forest inventory and get some answers about what your tree is contributing in terms of air pollution reduction, stormwater reduction, these sorts of things. We used iTree, but in a unique way. So we took sample plots across the neighborhood. We planted them virtually in ArcGIS according to the design rules that had been set. It might be hard to see on your screens. The black dots are the existing trees, and then each scenario so there's the existing trees, and then each scenario has different types of plantings. So there's the climate retrofit, the ecological, and the human health. They have different species of trees and different planting locations of trees to start to understand the differences between the scenarios. And so we input all of this into iTreeEco one at a time for each scenario. The value of doing this using a sample plot methodology is that you can see in this short table here We only had to virtually plant 300 trees, 200 trees, and 164 trees, but that scaled up in the software to represent 17,000, um, 17,000, 14,000, 12,000 new trees. I would probably still be doing this research if I had to virtually plant them all into ArcGIS. And so we found it to be a really efficient way to sort of start to understand the differences between these scenarios using these sample plots. But we definitely wanted to focus on multi-criteria assessment. So we had the software of iTreeEco. Everything was measured and modeled in ArcGIS. And we also used a new tool developed at the University of Florida called Building for Birds, which is a scenario tool for understanding wildlife habitat. And we combined these all with visual assessment to better communicate these ideas with the community. So by using these three different assessment techniques, we could really understand the differences between these different urban forest scenarios. To create these packages, here's the first one, sort of sharing what the differences are, benefits and challenges might be for each of the scenarios. So the first one here is no policy change. You can see we got about 16% canopy cover because a lot of sort of small to medium trees were planted in the community, so we weren't expecting a lot of growth. There is this one patch you can see in the corner, which is some remnant trees from one resident who kept their property and didn't sell it to the developers. And you can see the various performance metrics, physical access to nature still being pretty good. The visual access to that sort of rich layered nature that the residents spoke about, relatively low. The climate retrofit scenario had a crazy canopy cover, 44%, because we planted large trees wherever they could grow. And you can see something to note, the greenhouse gas sequestration, as reported by iTreeEco, about 135 tons a year, but still not great physical and visual access to nature because we hadn't really prioritized that sort of rich, layered, occupiable green space. It was just trees everywhere. The ecological one brought more sort of rich, layered habitat to the community, had a bit lower greenhouse gas sequestration, 107 tons per year, got really good habitat scores from the Building for Birds tool, still a bit low on visual access to nature. And then finally, what we call the human health scenario, similar amount of trees, similar amount of canopy cover to the ecological scenario, but you can see that it brought more nature just basically to the streets and smaller pocket parks. So there was a lot more physical and visual access to nature for all of the residents. And I'll just quickly show you some visualizations of one of the parks as a tool to help residents understand the differences between the scenarios. So that's no policy change, the park as it is. That's the climate retrofit scenario, ecological, and human health scenario. And so with all these visualizations and measurements, we can go back to the community and have conversations about their urban forest future for their neighborhood, and hopefully use these tools to plan different neighborhoods into the future. So thank you so much for your time today and allowing me to share this work. I'm looking forward to some questions and to Italo's presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really, really interesting. And I know I've got some questions, but just as a reminder, we'll take those at the end, after our next presentation. Yeah, thanks again, Sarah. So moving on, our next speaker is Dr. Ítalo Sousa de Sena. Ítalo is an assistant professor in digital landscape design in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy at University College Dublin. His research focuses on geographical virtual environments and immersive landscape visualizations, particularly leveraging Minecraft for public engagement in urban planning and climate action. His expertise spans geodesign, GIS, remote sensing, and geogames. And I'll pass on to you.
Hi, thank you, Matt, for the introduction. Thanks, Sarah, for the presentation. Really interesting topic. Yeah, I'm gonna diverge a bit from forestry and go into games a bit, but it's still on the realm of scenario building and talking about communities. So I prepared a few slides here to just introduce the concept of geogames for those who never heard of it before, and how geogames can be a driver for climate action. And I also brought some examples from the research we have here in UCD. But first of all, I just want to start by addressing the relevance of games at the moment. Like in the past few decades, we've seen that gaming culture have risen substantially in terms of profits and revenue, and also number of players actively playing a weekly basis. So these just shows that as a cultural element, it's quite relevant to bring games into research and use the power of these environments and systems to engage people in different topics. In that sense, we work with the concept here of serious games, which is basically applying, designing games for a particular purpose beyond the entertainment and the playfulness, but also because games can be simulations that help us to, an expensive test scenarios. So we can try out scenarios with games because games basically are systems with basic rules, and players are actors in that system that will interact with the system, and the system will provide some feedback. So it can be used as a testing ground for many things, and also for example, for participatory processes where you need to reach out to the community and hear from them what are their priorities for a particular topic. So in this case, it's good for experimentation, but also it's good for communication. In this context, geogames, they are a form of serious games, but they have the mechanics of geogames in general. They're integrated with spatial components. So usually, the term geogame started from the location-based games such as Pokemon Go. So you have a spatial mechanic that the player needs to interact with. But now, more recently, there are publications that link geogames to games that use geospatial data, real geospatial data in this case. So in that sense, we've been using these concepts to do participatory planning with young citizens in different cases, and it is part of this project that we have here in UCD, Create My Street. And it's a national funded project. The funding already finished, but we are still doing some pilots with the city, with other towns in Ireland. And this is basically the idea of the framework behind the project. So we are basically implementing the participation framework, the national participation framework for children in Ireland through games. And to do that, we are using this cyclical loop that starts with open geospatial data being transformed into game environments. We started testing that with Minecraft in the first moment, but the whole process goes on the game design element on how do you design insightful, valuable experiences through the game that prepare citizens to act and comment and have their opinions shared during more serious processes like a statutory consultation process with the local authorities. So it's kind of an icebreaker, and also it's a way to extract data from this game process as well. As you can see here, we close the loop by extracting these participation outputs to select priorities from the game exercise, and then these outputs are transformed back into geospatial data to prepare insights for local authorities. So just in a nutshell, how the project was developed, we started with in two, let's say, streams of research. The first one was really focused on the stakeholder engagement for design thinking. So we were designing the solution along with those who would be the users, not the players, those who would develop the games for real case applications. So local authorities, teachers, schools, libraries. So we had all these type of people informing us what are the priorities in their case, and we were tailoring. The other stream of the research was the development of this platform to create games by combining the what we could offer and what they needed in terms of collecting insights from the community. And we had a lot of outputs, different games. So we had three analog games created for different age groups, but they are all about how coastal cities can adapt to climate change in general. So these are serious games, so they are designed to be used with a briefing and debriefing phase. So you should inform the participants in advance that the game has a purpose. They play the game, and the game is a trigger for discussions, for knowledge building around the topic. We have a digital version of one of these board games on the left. If you have time, you can scan the QR code and access it. But I can share these links later with Matt, and then it can be circulated. In terms of Minecraft, we've been testing the capabilities of the game to simulate scenarios as well. For example, as you can see at the bottom right corner here, is a simulation of a coastal flood in Dublin. And we deployed the server where players would need to design interventions in the city to mitigate this. So we had that open for a while. There were people informing what were their flaws in the game design, but also we collect some insights from children about if the game was playful or not. And the one of the feedback was quite interesting, that it was way too dramatic, even though it's based on reality. This is a real flooding model that we used. But these are the way we develop games. Games are interactive, so we should interact more and more and more to have a proper game in the end. I brought here one pilot case from this research project that was looking into local area plan for a town here close to Dublin called Swords. And it was an activity as part of the Dublin Climate Action Week last year. And we used the whole framework in this pilot from analog game to Minecraft by inviting children to think about their local area, learn about nature-based solutions, and design these in Minecraft in the later stage. So in the process, we have steps. So the first step is a mental map exercise with cards. So the game mechanics is that each player would have a limited number of cards. They need to replicate the area, target area with these cards. And you can see they are thematic. So you have forest, grass, water, dirt, or things like this. But it's free. So the thing is that they need to collaborate to map the same area together. The second step is to start placing nature-based solutions as strategies. So this is more in the planning realm. So they're co-planning these nature-based solution interventions in the area by setting priorities on this mapped area. And as you can see here, the nature-based solutions are colored cubes. They're combined, two different colors combined. And this is a way for us to link the nature-based solution from the analog game to Minecraft. So we would have the same representation in Minecraft for that particular nature-based solution, and children would be able to relate that to the real, to the design, the desired design for that intervention. I have a short video here from the day.
I'm protecting the forest over here. Must protect by placing the tree. Wait a minute. We saw droid forces once again.
I guess because we don't fight anymore.
I placed a tree.
So you see that they were really talkative, discussing about strategies and how to implement these strategies. This is the social readiness element of the analog game. Sometimes digital games can be quite individualist. You're playing alone. Usually you're not interacting in person with another person in the same space. So it's really hard to create this kind of collaborative element during the gameplay. So with the analog, we kind of prepare them to be ready for this digital world and collaborate further in the digital world. As I mentioned, the third step is the implementation of the nature-based solution. So here you see that if I go back a few slides, you see that this is the castle in the city. It's a medieval castle in the city center. And we made that as the main landmark, the first thing that they had to find in the game. And when they find it, they have these nature-based solutions described and with an equivalent in Minecraft for them to replicate in the game. And you have the same color cubes there for them to link the meaning, and chests with basic items and blocks that they could use to design these nature-based solutions. So during the workshop, they were really linking nature-based solutions to planting trees, mostly because in Minecraft, the mechanic of planting trees is quite engaging, because once you plant a sapling and that sapling grows into a full tree in a matter of time. So they were really considering like trees as a big solution. But we had some other elements being designed as well. For example, urban farming and green roofs were also part of their design. And also landscaping elements like water features, ponds, just to add some aesthetics to the area they were designing. But we noticed that during the analog game, it was way more active in terms of discussion and collaboration in comparison to the Minecraft phase, because they were playing the same Minecraft world, and it creates some conflicts when they're dealing with less collaborative players. So in that sense, we had to rethink the design of the game in a sense that we would need to have more control on the Minecraft side to avoid any conflicts to take place in the digital version only. But they were really, after they played in Minecraft, we asked them a few questions. We had a form with to confirm if they could link the nature-based solution meanings to the blocks. But what we noticed from the whole exercise with the children was that they have a growing concern about environmental quality, not that much on design, but they know that the quality of the environment in their neighborhood is decreasing and it's under threat. So they have some references on what is sustainability, what could be implemented to solve that issue, but they don't have a clear view on how this can be achieved in the long term, because they are young, they are still learning things, but at the same time, there's this idea of sustainability being related to, renewable energy or low carbon communities, and mostly, again, trees. They were really advocating for trees the whole time. As you can see, the trees, they planted, I don't know, maybe hundreds of trees during 10 minutes of gameplay. And you see here some examples of the green roof and urban farming in the area as well. This is just for you if you want to explore a bit what was the scenario before and after, and also how we extract the data from Minecraft to create geospatial data. I just avoided put a lot of maps here just to optimize the time, but in a sense it was a way for us to communicate with the local authorities that children are aware of the value of rethinking particular areas of their neighborhood. And because Ireland has this framework for children participation, and there's a lack of capacity in local authorities to bring this age group into the discussion, more serious discussion, we considered we produce a report after the workshop for the local authorities to have access to the data. And after we conclude all the pilots, we also wrote a policy review in the context of climate participation in Ireland, and it was published recently in April. And we were advised by a group of children that were testing our games constantly and providing feedback. They weren't part of the workshops; they were just advising on the games themselves. And last but not least, this last month we had the second Geogames symposium here in Ireland, and this is a QR code for the proceedings that it was just published last week, so it's freshly online for everyone. And there are more examples on how Geogames can be applied in different scenarios, urban planning or even non-planning related disciplines. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was really, really interesting. I will, yes, I'll pass it over to Mel and see if we've got any questions. I think we have a few.
Yeah, so I would encourage people to submit their questions on the Q&A. I think that seems to be working for most people. So first off, for Sarah, we've got a couple of related questions from Pellen, and they ask, may they ask, how does the location of the trees in the same plot affect the outcome in these three scenarios? And then a follow-on question that's related around the species between the different scenarios as well, and how they vary.
Thank you so much for those questions. Yes, we spent a lot of time making specific tree palettes for each of the scenarios. The climate ones, we had a local government do a climate adaptive species list, and then we picked sort of the largest growing trees for carbon sink as well. And then the human health species were from characteristics mentioned by neighborhood residents. Sorry, I didn't get into that, but yes, we selected a palette of species for each scenario. And then the location of the tree is actually quite important because if you're doing just sample plots, those all get replicated many times to create the full neighborhood sort of assessment. And so a tree, for example, in a certain location in one scenario represents, a thousand other trees. When the software is running its numbers. So it can make quite a big difference if you plant all the trees sort of far away from a building in terms of building energy dynamics or things like that. So I don't know the algorithms of the software. I don't know the black box behind that machine, but I do know there were quite a few differences between different tree locations. So some we put further away from buildings, some we clustered together, those sorts of things. They did have quite a big effect on the outcome because we were using sample plots to be representative. I hope that answers your questions. Thank you for the questions.
And I think whilst we've got you in the mic, Sarah, there's another question from an anonymous attendee. They ask, has the utility infrastructure of street tree planting been considered? So that's in relation to the other services.
Yeah, it is a great question. For the climate retrofit, no, we didn't. We just said, what if you had no limits and could plant trees everywhere? We were curious about how it would perform. So that's the fun thing about scenarios, is we're just testing. We wouldn't recommend that planting strategy for the neighborhood. For the others, we were a little bit more mindful. of where utilities were, but I didn't have like the exact sort of gas utility lines for every single street. But the development followed a pretty typical pattern for a North American, Canadian suburb. So we sort of knew where they were, and yeah, we did think about it for some, but for that one scenario, we didn't on purpose, just to sort of ask that question. What happens if you put trees everywhere? How does it perform? Which was fun. The fun thing about scenarios.
I think we've got another couple of questions coming in for yourself, Sarah. Before we move on, I've got a burning question for Ítalo, and I'm sure others on the team will have as well.
I'll try to make more succinct answers. So.
Yeah, no problem at all. So Emma asks, beyond the visuals, did you need to communicate the different scenarios to local residents in other ways? So that's, visually without knowledge, they could look quite similar and you might not know why they've been presented.
Yeah, I should have brought in the street. So we did streetscape visuals as well, which look very different. I should have brought those in. So that was helpful. But we wanted to pair the visuals with those metrics and say, look, this is what you asked for. This is how you could potentially achieve it, sort of. So I think combining the visuals with some of those metrics was how we approached that issue, Emma. Oh, in terms of the trade-offs, yeah, I'm still writing up that paper. But yeah, the trade-offs, a lot of it came down to sort of shade in the winter. It's still quite dark and rainy in Canada, in Vancouver in the winter. So the climate retrofit, that's one example I'll give you, is too dark and shady in the winter time. And so that's one sort of aesthetic trade-off that we discussed.
Brilliant. Matt, before I jump in, have you got anything you'd like to ask or to move to Ítalo?
Yeah, I had a question around obviously the initial stage was as well as speaking to experts and academics, speaking to us local and residents and asking their preferences for different types of benefits from nature. I wondered if it was the same residents were involved the whole way through, and they were the ones that it was communicated back to. And if so, did you see actually people might change their minds, or how if it made them change their thinking about like what they might want in the future?
We didn't actually. Which is very different from normal engagement processes, because this was more of a study than they were working with the city to plant new trees. So it was random sampling, sidewalk sampling. One difference though is I did one sort of big set in October, and then I had a bunch of students go out and do a bit more in the summer. And cooling shade was very important in the summer months. In the fall, people talked a lot about fall color. So seasonality is important. You have to talk to people about trees year round to really understand what they like about trees.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Is there anything you would like to ask before I jump in with my own question rather selfishly? Is there anything you would like to ask Ítalo, Matt, whilst we're with you?
You can jump in, Mel.
Okay, yeah, I'm really interested. I think when we look at the wonderful work that's been presented by Sarah, that really engages sort of experts and people in the community, but I guess not in an intergenerational way. For Ítalo, I mean, your work's absolutely fantastic and really quite novel in terms of the approach that you're taking using serious games. And you can imagine in the future that may well have integration with, more integration with through AI, with with GIS and as the world turns and we become more integrated. But I wondered, in terms of from a participatory perspective, whether the children then felt empowered to begin to discuss these topics within their families, whether that was something you picked up at all, because it's not something we might traditionally see. Maybe in if participants attend a workshop, they don't feel compelled to maybe talk about that and at home. But I think children playing games and coming home with new knowledge would maybe spread that. internally. I don't know if you had any evidence of that or whether it's something you looked at all.
Yeah, that's a great question because one of the main aspects that we consider when engaging with children in this type of activities is that to engage the children, you need to engage the adults, their parents, especially because there are consent forms to be sent. They need to sign things. They need to read information leaflets. So in a certain degree, they are already involved because of the research element. But children, they usually are more creative because they don't have these kind of serious boundaries that us as adults start to create over time because professional life, responsibilities and things. So they are creative. They want to express themselves way more. So when you bring a game that is part of their life, like Minecraft, they know things. They already know what are the blocks in the game. They know how the blocks work. So if you link things from the serious element, like nature-based solution, and transform these into something that is in the same language the children are used to, like Minecraft, they will talk about it. We had experiences in drop-in sessions and in schools as well. I must say that in schools is more interesting because you have a control setting. The parents are contacted by the teacher, so you have this kind of gatekeeping by the school, which is great. But drop-in sessions are more relevant because the parents bring their children and they cannot just leave the children there and leave and do something else. So they stay, they talk to us, they play the games. I'm not sure if you had time to notice my last picture was the dad and the kid playing Minecraft together. That was like one of the best outcomes of that workshop in particular, because we managed to reach two different age groups at the same time using the same solution. So yeah, it's important to consider that children are also a way to engage older audiences.
That's great. Thank you. I do have lots of other questions, but I'm just going to hand back in case Matt or any of the rest of the team want to come in.
I saw Malika had a question in the chat actually around the game I could build
yes.
on. As most gaming involves competing against other players or teams, how does one design a game that arrives at consensus and best case scenarios? And that's actually something I was going to ask as well. How different were people's visions about what they wanted in terms of nature-based solutions between the children, or was there very much a consensus? But yeah, I think that competition element when we talk about games is interesting with this.
Yeah, actually, this is also quite relevant because let's say that there are main game mechanics that you can exploit to engage people in certain things in the game. Usually, competitive games are more engaging because you have this kind of winning element in the end that you can call yourself the winner. But we are really focused on collaborative and cooperative games. So you're not trying to beat other players. You're trying to beat the game or you're trying to beat the problem. And when it's cooperative, for example, you can have one of the analog games we developed is a scenario building, but a game, but each player has their own hidden agenda. So I'm a developer and another player is an environmentalist, but we need to beat the same problem together, which is coastal flooding, let's say. So you need to manage resources in a cooperative way, but you want still to get some, let's say, advantages through the game system because you need to achieve your own goal along with the shared goal. So it really depends on the objective of the game. For example, if for example, in the one I presented today, the focus was in collaboration. So we want children to discuss, collaborate in creating one scenario that is like, okay, this is the opinion of children of Swords about nature-based solutions. To achieve that, the cubes they had to exchange white cubes for nature-based solutions, but they had limited number of white cubes. So they only could purchase one nature-based solution at a time, but the second nature-based solution would need to be bought together with another player. So they had to combine resources to be able to implement things. So it's really there's a whole science behind game design, by the way. So you can really tweak little details to achieve different things. And I think that's the goal, the interesting part of using games, because you can have really different experiences, outcomes by just changing a small piece of the game mechanics.
Perfect. Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question before I wrap up. There's a question from Jess about how much experience you need to actually apply these kind of methods and techniques you've described. Is it something that can be learned quite quickly, or is it something that probably need outsourcing? How kind of accessible, I guess, is the technology and the methods for people? If you can answer that one briefly, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, actually, this was one of the questions we had for the project itself. So capacity building, how can people just get the resources and implement it and use the methods right away? So we developed analog games to be customizable. So you download a PDF, you print it, you can modify the game as you wish. And that's like, let's say, the most flexible way to make these games applicable. Minecraft, though, is a bit more complicated because you need a license, you need laptops. There's a whole thing behind running a server as well. But what we developed was a platform where you can just draw a square on an OpenStreetMap, and it will extract a Minecraft version of the area for you, like a simplified model. That would be a starting point in this case. So it depends on the level of detail you want to achieve with the representation in the scenario. But all games are customizable. You can change rules and you can adapt them to every scenario you have.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I would very much encourage you to reach out to speakers as well if you have questions. Or if they're happy, I'll share email addresses after with attendees. But yeah, it's very much in the spirit of the COP is learning from each other and yeah, building these connections and relationships. So thank you. Thank you for those great questions, and thank you to our speakers for the great talks and the great answers. Very finally, just before we leave and building on that kind of reflecting on what we've heard today, there's a takeaway activity. If people are interested, they can go into our mirror board, and there should be a link in the chat. And this is a rose, thorn, bud activity. So kind of reflecting on the methods and approaches we've heard. Add a rose, which is a strength, a thorn, which is a challenge, and a bud, which is a potential for kind of a new idea, how we build from that. And we're going to use this to hopefully build into a workshop we're hoping to do after the summer. Our community practice around scenario planning for grey to green transitions. So definitely, if you feel up for it and interested to reflect on what you've heard today, have a go filling in, adding your suggestions to that mirror board. And on that note, I'd like to just promote our final event in our series, which is taking place next Wednesday at a slightly earlier time of 12 midday. Here we'll hear from actually 3 speakers working in the public sector, from the Met Office, working with digital twins, Ítalo working on urban nature plans, and one of our urban ReLeaf partners, the City of Utrecht, and their experiences with digital twins. And we hope to see some of you there. And on behalf of the University of Dundee team and our wider Urban ReLeaf project, our partners listed on screen, I'd like to thank you for your time and hope to see you at our final events, and give one final thanks to our 2 fantastic speakers. Thank you.